Welcome to our presentation titled 5 Pains of a Test Manager and How to Overcome Them, featuring Reg Struck.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to sunny Orlando. Came here from Toronto, Canada, expecting and hoping some sunshine from the weird snowfall we had, but I guess I'm going to have to go back home for that. But at any rate, my name is Reg Struck, and I'm a product manager at Polarian Software. And what I wanted to discuss today was, ironically enough, I only have 5 pains, but I know that there are dozens and dozens more pains for test managers in today's environment. But what I wanted to do is just discuss some of the highlighted pains, maybe the top 5 that I can think of. And this is a little bit subjective as well. This is based on my research, my experience, talking formally to colleagues and customers and partners, etc. So take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. And I'll keep this as an open dialogue as well, so that if you have any, feel free to ask any questions. Give you a little bit of history about where I'm coming from, so you know that I do actually have some experience about what I'm talking about. And I'll go in order of past history. So I was a senior product manager at MKS, which is now formerly PTC. And then I actually migrated over to healthcare and became the global director of technical product management worldwide. And now I'm actually residing as senior product manager for our QA products. So the first on the top of my list, and this is in no order of priority, it just happens that way, but the first I would suggest is confusion. And what do I mean by confusion? Well, one would be testing versus debugging. What does that mean? So debugging, removal of bugs, as opposed to testing for quality or testing for the right product. What am I testing? That's a good one. What are the goals of what we're testing? Tools. They change the process. If you don't understand that, it's a reality. It will in some shape or form. I'm talking particularly about software tools. Did I do that, or did the tool do that? It's very common when you think about it. Verification versus validation. Are we building the right product? So we verify that we build the right product. Or the validation. Are we building the right product? So product right or the right product? Some suggested solutions that I found that have helped throughout the years of experience I've had. Specify product requirements in a very quantifiable manner before testing starts. Now, obviously, this isn't always necessarily in your control. A lot of times it's in people like me. But I would say it's your due diligence to actually make sure that you're involved and engaged with the product requirements ideation phase and help make us legit and straight by making sure that we actually write very quantifiable requirements. And what I mean by that is literally being able to attach some kind of metric to it. So quantifying what we actually want to test for. Specifying testing objectives explicitly. I would suggest a test plan. It doesn't have to be a formalized test plan, but certainly an informal test plan based on your requirements, your goal. Identify the user classes of the software. So the roles. There's ever-expanding roles. Think about how you test for what the user experience is. Who's your software targeted towards? What are the features targeted to? Again, can't emphasize more, but a test plan that also emphasizes rapid cycle development. And I'll actually talk a little bit more about that further. And a very big, strong point, involve the testers or testing department right from the software ideation and design phase. Document each test. What we formally know as test cases, highly suggest you document it as well. Number 2, speed. Time constraints, and we have to deliver faster. There's more and more pressure for testing with limited resources. The focus, unfortunately, becomes on completing your tasks as opposed to covering what needs to be tested. What happens is that quality may suffer. We may actually miss critical defects. Some examples here. Madden Football in 2008. Now, I have a 16-year-old son, so some of my stuff will be game-focused. As most of you, if you have especially teenage boys, they're definitely gamers. Madden 2008 was, because of competitive influences, was released prematurely, and it was a certain fiasco. There was major backlash from the user community, and almost basically tanked the actual Madden. Next one, Xbox. This is a real famous one as well. Xbox was in high competition with both the Wii and PS2 and 3 models. And they were way behind in getting a gaming box out into the marketplace. So they ended up releasing it way ahead of schedule. The result was that you actually had hardware crashes, and there was even lawsuits that have only been settled in the last year. Some suggested solutions that I found that have worked continuously in my job environment. Automate your workflow and processes. Implement a test management plan. Doesn't have to necessarily be software, but definitely a test management plan. What that would mean is things like templates and process. Have predefined templates and process to actually help with your workflow. If possible, write reusable test cases. Document those test cases, write reusable test plans, reusable documents as well. Automation of certain components of your testing environment, where it makes the most sense, and I'll talk about automation as well. Develop a test plan that emphasizes rapid cycle development again. So what I'm talking about, and you're probably quite familiar with this, I believe it was James Bach that was actually one of the pioneers in this, is test-driven development. I won't talk about it too long, but you can go online and there's all kinds of information about test-driven development. This one here, from Deliver Faster, I cannot emphasize more than anything else, and it doesn't necessarily involve software. It's prioritization. And I have a whole list. I won't go into great detail on some of these, but I'll highlight a few of those. So number one, I would say, is the importance of your functionality in the project. Prioritize what's the most important functionality. What's the highest risk modules? Other ones as well is the safety impact. So if you're regulated, if you're into medical device software, for example, you want to find out the safety impact, mitigate those risks. Test for that, obviously. Another big one that we actually don't spend a lot of time on, unfortunately, in my experience, is the financial impact on your users. What components that you are testing for will have an actual financial impact on them, negative or positive. And another one that's very important is what aspects of your application actually affect your users. So we do our daily routines. Myself, I'm guilty of that as well, as the fact that every day I've got requirements to write and all that kind of stuff. But then we lose hindsight sometimes in our daily activities. The reality is that we're building these things for end users. So we have to take a step back and understand what are the things that these people use. Some more over here. So as you can see, prioritization is a very important concept that I have for being able to deliver faster. Parts of the code that are the most complex, highly suggest that you collaborate with both development, because they will know those things. And then if you noticed over examples of problems would cause the worst publicity, or the ones that cause the customer service complaints. So I would even talk to support. A lot of times in a lot of environments I've found that support is not communicated with. I think they actually should be involved. Someone that should represent support. They hear firsthand all the customer complaints. They'll know what parts of your product are highly focused, as well as the ones that probably lack the most functionality or need more testing. So quote for all of these: quality must be built into the development process. You can't use testing to add quality after the fact. It has to be involved at the very beginning all the way through the entire product process. Software tools. This is a biggie. Unavailability of right tools. So it could be internal constraints, could be budget, availability of funding, but then it's the type of tools. You have defect tracking, test case creation, execution. Normally we call it test case management, test automation, and the list goes on and goes on. However, there's things like integrations, or lack thereof usually. And then there's the MS Excel and Word equation. You might be surprised to know, or maybe even a lot of you here use Excel, but the majority of testing worldwide is still done with Excel. Very time consuming, especially now that we're getting into the era of big data, and it's very difficult once you get into a lot of iterations, a lot of data to manage and maintain. And then there's a lack of metrics. Try to have any kind of real reporting, specifically from a stakeholder's point of view, with Excel. And integrations. So some things that have worked in the past, highly suggest that you look at some form of test management software. And what I mean by that is basically to manage both your test cases, your documents, and all the activities that surround your testing environment. Replace or leverage Excel and Word. It's funny, I was actually at our booth just before this, and an attendee came to the booth and was actually talking about Excel, and they couldn't believe that they were still using Excel internally. Very large organization, yada yada. So again, should have customizable workflow. One of the pet peeves I have in software, being a product manager and a consumer of software, is the fact that a lot of times when you actually purchase software, you have to actually manipulate or completely change your existing workflow and process to use that software. I'm suggesting that you should not have to do that, at least at a minimum. Tools will change some things, that's reality, but I would suggest that you look at tools that actually mitigate that impact. And there are a lot of tools out there that do it. Automation. Definitely looking at automation. It's not a trend anymore, it's a fact. I'll talk about a lot more about automation in the next slide. Integrations. They're typically, what I found is that there isn't really one company that provides everything adequately. So you definitely have to look at integrations and try to find things that integrate well. Now the nice thing is that what I've seen the trends are in the last few years, especially with testing and even development tools, is that the ecosystem is really becoming more holistic and a lot more integrations are occurring. Standards and risks. So this might not apply to everybody, but more and more we're being regulated, heavily regulated, almost in every industry. So it's major costs on an organization and has major regulatory implications. You think of Sarbanes-Oxley, you think about FDA with medical compliance. There can be some severe restrictions. They can shut you down. You can even go to jail. The adherence to these various regulations and compliance, and they're increasing almost daily. So I'll go through this very quickly, but medical, ISO, Sarbanes, the top ones, they're all asking for the same thing basically. Document, document, document. What do you do? Is it repeatable? Can you document it? Can you prove it? Very, very user intensive, specifically for testing environments. So manual testing procedures, very time consuming. And a lot of that ends up having to be documented. And they want, anybody that's been involved with auditors, the auditors come in and they want to see in the nth detail what you tested line by line. Traceability, this is becoming very, very important. And when I talk about traceability, I'm talking about traceability not from just an auditor's perspective of what you've documented, but also from the source code all the way to released product. End-to-end traceability to be able to prove that. This is a very wordy, so I'll just explain, highlight it, but at the end of the day, you need to articulate that you've mitigated your risk. And you validated that through your testing procedures. And this is just part of the CFR Part 11, but what's at the very bottom here, it was from an auditor, is the fact that only one thing worse than having no controls is thinking that you have the controls. And in this particular case, it was the fact that only the idea was, in this example, that data was the only thing to be audited, and it ended up being everything. It was hardware, applications, software, everything has to be audited underneath this regulatory compliance. So I do definitely suggest, it's highly recommended to find out if you are underneath a regulated environment, whether it's a course, there's lots of online courses, lots of expertise out there. Definitely take some time to find out what those regulations mean. Back to standards, the solutions that we've had in the past. Now, I said that I worked at Agfa Healthcare. We were a medical device software company. We were heavily regulated underneath the FDA, so I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this, at least one of these things. Look for software that is designed specifically for compliance. Don't try to build it in-house. We tried doing that ourselves. It was a nightmare. Automate wherever you can and take the baby steps. Again, we'll talk more about automation. Can't say enough about it, but functional testing is a baby step I'd say that definitely you should consider automating. Document your process and follow it. One of the pitfalls that I've seen in most organizations I've been at is that we'll put all these great documents in place, whether it's a test plan, regulatory mitigation, whatever, and then we don't follow the plan. Well, what's the point of putting a plan together? It becomes a checklist. So then test management doesn't have to be necessarily software, but the whole idea of using test management. So the ability to actually validate your test with complete traceability from end to end. Could be in a document format. I know a company that I just spoke to a couple weeks ago. They're using wikis to do this, but they're doing it, and they pass audit control. Something that's really significant as well, dashboards. Whether you're using external tools, custom tool, it's great because you can look at full test coverage. The idea behind this is being able to look at what are we doing today, how much do we need to do, what's the progress, where are any of the risks that are inherent, are we going to meet our targets? So this really hits home. I found this actually a couple weeks ago online. It's from Gartner. And they basically, so about 40% of medium-sized, mid-sized to large companies are going to be audited in the next year or so. And that will increase by 20% each and every year. So whether we like it or not, regulations are going to continue to become high profile, and also they're going to continue to increase. All right, so Mr. Roboto. Dating myself there, and anybody that knows that one would be dating themselves as well. Test automation. Test automation will eliminate human testers. True or false? Anyone? False, absolutely, absolutely. What tests should be automated and which ones first? So you get a plan in place, you buy test automation, you spend all kinds of money on it. Now what? Lack of test automation. You bought test automation, it comes back to that same question. You're not automating anything. Automate your testing procedures when you have a lot of regression work. So hopefully you get some little nuggets out of this. If you walk away with one nugget today, I'll be happy. Implementation. Now this one's a little tricky, and I'll get into it why it is, but it does take commitment. It takes time to set up and maintain. If not implemented correctly, it costs you money. So the reality is there is some scripting involved. There is a skill set involved. You do have to be able to create these scripts. You do have to actually manage these scripts and maintain them. Some places, I know a company that spent a significant amount of time creating and implementing automation. They thought they could just walk away from it, and ended up they had somebody that was full-time managing scripts because they had to change the scripts every time they updated something. So it defeat the purpose, quite frankly, of test automation. The initial cost can be high for those various reasons. However, also, way back, and I'm going back to the days of Mercury, which is now part of HP, when it was significantly expensive to implement from at least a licensing point of view. Now it's fantastic, and this is one of the reasons why we can adopt a lot of automation, is the fact that a lot of it is actually service-based, and you can get it from online, which is fantastic. It drops the price, and it's when you need to use it. So that's changed things dramatically as well. So, yeah, 100% automation does not exist. Anybody's telling you that, run away. The right automation. What I mean by this is that, first of all, you have to make sure you have the right skill sets. There is some programming involved with automation. Also make sure that you are able to create reusable tests for the automation purposes. Again, it defeats the purpose if you actually have to go create, you use automation. It's supposed to simplify your life. And then if you're having to actually go and maintain scripts and you can't reuse the tests, it defeats the purpose of automation. So in our experience, unit tests have provided the highest ROI, and I'll show you in a second. Here it is here. So this actually is an inverted, the triangle actually is inverted from priority. So at the bottom, the unit tests, I'd suggest that's the first ones you actually work on. The reason why is because it's actually easiest ways to actually get started. There's small test scripts that you can create, really easy to maintain, so high ROI. Every individual organization you have to take a look, in fact, to be quite frank about it, is and see what actually makes sense to automate. I would not suggest automating everything at once, just baby steps. You'll get a bigger bang for your buck. And, like this one, it's a creative, challenging task, which all of you all well know. Finally depends on your skills and experience and really how you're going to handle the challenge. Thanks very much. Questions? So the question is that you wanted to know how many people use it? Yeah, I actually didn't bring a stat. I think it was, there's been Gartner and various other ones, but the majority of organizations are still using Excel spreadsheets to manage their tests. So, and this actually comes directly from, it was one of the CTOs over at Microsoft. And the quote, I should have actually included the quote because it was quite funny, because he couldn't believe they're still using it to manage tests. A, that they were using it to manage tests, and B, they're still using it. But yeah, the majority still use it. And we see that. I see that every day with our customers.
I have one from the virtual audience. You've used automation in all of your slides. My question is, what percentage of the total test cases or testing scope should be automated? Is there any rule of thumb?
It's a good question. The ratio. So it comes back down to, I wouldn't normally say a percentage. In fact, what I've seen in experience is that there isn't a percentage per se. Now, you go to an automation company, they might actually have a percentage, although they do say 100%, which is not true. But at any rate, what I would say is that you have to examine every single one of your own instances and what makes the most sense to automate. So it really comes down to I take the philosophy of the low-hanging fruit. What's the easiest to start with? And that's why I said, for example, unit testing. Question down here? Yeah, and it's a really good point, is that when you're doing automation, this has to be a buy-in from the entire, the development team as well has to be brought into this as well. So certainly, I would say that it's going to make their life easier as well. Yeah, so what I did is, this is a breakdown of the suggested way to actually, the strategy you should take for actually automating your testing environment. And the triangle itself at the base, that's in order of priority. So unit testing would be the first one. And one of the reasons, the primary reason is what you had said, is the fact that it's low-hanging fruit, and it's actually the quickest and probably the fastest return on your investment. And then next would be acceptance testing, to investigate looking at that, and then your GUI testing and manual testing.
Two things. For the virtual audience, would you mind repeating the question so that they can hear it? And then one question here from that audience. If we use Scrum or Agile, do you think automation would work?
Okay, so you wanted to repeat the previous question, I assume. So the question was about the triangle here and what the priority and significance of the triangle. And what I said was, the answer is that from the bottom up is the priority. So, for example, the base unit testing would be the first thing I'd consider to automate. Next would be acceptance tests, then GUI tests, and finally manual tests. And then the question was, does it make any sense to do any kind of test automation in a Scrum environment? Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good question. It does make sense, and I'll tell you why. Because we actually have a Scrum environment at Polarian Software, and we do have test automation. So it's again back to the same principles, is that if it makes sense to actually, in your environment, and back to, this is what I come back to right here, is this is a very important slide, and this is what we've used, is the fact that, first of all, you have to make sure you have the right skill set. Second is the fact is that if you can create repeatable, usable tests, and the fact that the maintenance on these. So it doesn't matter what kind of process you're using in-house, these principles here should apply. If they don't apply, then obviously test automation isn't worth it. Okay, so I can only say from experience. Doesn't mean it's right, but I'll just say what's worked for us in our organizations. Acceptance testing, actually, in my previous life, specifically at AGFA, because being a medical device software company was very important. And ours was actually multi-layered. So the initial testing was actually done from our, what they were, I guess you would call your launch group. So kind of like a professional services, a tier 1 type support. As well, though, interesting enough, is that we had key customers that actually did acceptance testing as well. So it depends on the environment that you're in. However, I'd say that I don't know your environment, obviously, but I'd say that there's enough complexity, enough importance in acceptance testing, is that you'd probably need multiple stakeholders involved, not just the testing team. So hopefully I kind of answered your question. Good question. If it involves multiple number of stakeholders, you might not be able to automate it. So again, it comes back down to those principles on the slide before. And that's why you start with baby steps. What makes the most sense, from an ROI perspective. So I obviously don't know all the details within your organization, but that would be one of the red flags right off the bat. But you know what? It doesn't mean it's not solvable, and it might actually make sense. Again, it comes back to why your organization has to ask, why are you automating? Why? What's the purpose? Is it to save you time? Is it to save you money? Sometimes those things are no. So then you don't automate, right? So I remember when automation was really at the forefront, and everybody was like, "Yeah, have to automate. It's going to save everything. There won't be any time constraints, and it's utopia." And that hasn't happened. There are certain areas that definitely make sense, and it has made some major changes, significant changes, and made life easier for a lot of testing environments. But it isn't the utopia that people like to consider that it is. The scenario of actually acceptance testing, if you have a predefined, repeatable process in place, if the stakeholders are minimal, maybe you don't have a lot of changes either, the acceptance testing is quite clear-cut, I'd say that there's probably a good chance that you could automate that. It's changes, yes, the biggest, you're absolutely correct. So the question was, is that why was GUI's automation testing actually one of the last ones to consider? And your answer is absolutely correct, is that there's significant changes that occur on a very regular basis. That's one of the main reasons.
How do you get buy-in from an organization to involve an automation team at the development stage and not at the regression execution, which is very late?
That is a good question, and the reason why I chuckle about it, and I heard other people chuckle about it as well, I've experienced it multiple times. I'm going to go back to a slide here that's... Okay, the bolded right there. That's the significant thing that I found always in any organization that I've been in that changes things dramatically. And I hope, maybe I'm a little naive, but I hope it's changed considerably since I started in software, where testing was a lot of times an after fact and yada yada, so you know of all those challenges. But involve testers right from the beginning. You have to have testing, you have to treat testing, in my personal opinion, and it's worked in places that I've worked at, is you have to treat it as a stakeholder, a business stakeholder. And we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing that, especially with high-profile quality issues, and Toyota is a good example of that. Cost them billions of dollars. There's tons of examples, right? But it's really, an organization has to, and it is a cultural thing, but an organization has to realize that testing is a key stakeholder and has to be involved from the very beginning of your development process. And that will change things tremendously. And from your point of view, it's like you might be saying, yeah, okay, whatever, you've given this and that's great for you to be able to say it. You have to be an evangelist. You have to actually be that evangelist. Someone in your organization, probably from your testing department, has to be an evangelist. You might not be very popular with some people sometimes about that, but it will make your life a lot easier in the long run. So, yeah, involve testers right from the software ideation and development phase. Then you'll get buy-in. Other questions at all?
I have one. Unit test cases and integration test cases are typically white box and therefore more complicated. A lot of coding goes in and out during them. Why would we want to automate them further?
Not on this slide here, but it was the complexity of the code. So that was one area I had mentioned a line about highlight the complexity of your code, where the complex code is. So it might not be automated. Okay, it might not. If it's too complex, then the ROI is not there. Other questions? The example was the test-driven development. So that was the example. So the whole theory that James Bach created, and with exploratory testing involved in that. So the two key concepts in there that I've seen that's worked is getting people, again, it comes back to getting testing involved at the very beginning. So also that's a two-phase approach. Is that also just as we think uniquely as testing a lot of us think of testing as belonging only to the testing department, for lack of better terminology. And really that has to happen in all areas of the process of creating a product. It's being able to, developers are doing testing, whatever kind of testing they're doing, all the way through the whole chain of process. So right from the beginning, we're actually doing testing. Okay. And there's other countless ways from a procedure how to do it. And the one example is test-driven development, which is the James Bach philosophy that spun out of that. So that's what I meant by that. Other questions or comments or experiences you'd like to share? All right. Thank you very much.